I am your host, and I'm so excited that you're here joining me this morning. Y'all, this is such a worthy use of our time every single morning to take a pause and just take a moment to really align our soul, our spirit, our physical self, our mind towards the truth. And it really is this time of orienting every part of us towards the truth that is higher and greater than even this present world. You know, we remind ourselves of who does God say we are? Who can we be? What are we called to do? You know, I think of it as kind of three answers to these three questions. Who am I? Whose am I? And why am I here? And so answering those questions and orienting ourselves back again and again towards what is more true than here in this moment has brought so much meaning and so much hope, especially during times when we experience loss. For those of you who are new to the show, just 2 weeks ago, actually 3 weeks yesterday, my uncle passed away in his sleep and nothing was wrong. And, you know, it's interesting being in the place where you're seeing the perspective of grief from the wife, and then seeing the perspective of grief from the children, seeing the perspective of grief from the sibling, my mom, and the perspective of grief from his parents losing a son. And it was the most dynamic, multifaceted grief I've ever experienced. And it was devastating to witness, yet simultaneously, we do not grieve without hope. And so these morning shows are the times when we remind ourselves of what is more true than what we can see here in this moment. And in the evening shows, for those of you who join us there, we do talk about the cultivation of emotional intelligence along with intellectual intelligence in an artificial intelligence-driven world. So how do we cultivate ourselves as a human being in this place where we're driven by AI in so many ways? It's like a race. It's like a race towards removing the individual from jobs and from so much of where we have been finding our meaning in the past. And so now that we've got something replacing our own intellectual property in so many ways, how do we find meaning in the other parts of life, like our emotional connection and in relationship with others through these other elements? So we are going to go ahead and dive in. We are on lesson 118 today. We're in the middle of a review section where we're just reminding ourselves of some of the previous lessons we've read, and then we'll go ahead and move forward beyond the reviews. I think in 3 days we'll start with kind of a new section on A Course in Miracles. But let's go ahead and start with some of the preceding lessons leading up to today's review, and then we'll get started. Lesson 91, miracles are seen in light. Lesson 92, miracles are seen in light, and light and strength are one. Lesson 93, light and joy and peace abide in me. Lesson 94, I am as God created me. Lesson 95, I am one self united with my Creator. Lesson 96, salvation comes from my one self. Lesson 97, I am spirit. Lesson 98, I will accept my part in God's plan for salvation. Lesson 99, salvation is my only function here. Lesson 100, my part is essential to God's plan for salvation. Lesson 101, God's will for me is perfect happiness. Lesson 102, I share God's will for happiness for me. Lesson 103, God being love is also happiness. Lesson 104, I seek but what belongs to me in truth. And today's reviews. Lesson 105, God's peace and joy are mine. Today I will accept God's peace and joy in glad exchange for all the substitutes that I have made for happiness and peace. Lesson 106, let me be still and listen to the truth. Let my own feeble voice be still, and let me hear the mighty voice for truth itself assure me that I am God's perfect son. Y'all, we've talked about the narratives and scripts and programs that we have very much so running our lives. In so many ways, they're running on default. It's the scripts that we never even intended us to be running, but they're running kind of in the background at all times. And they're running in so many ways on autopilot without even our permission. It's just that's the way that we were raised to think. That's the way that we were raised to engage with the world. Back to those three questions, it's what we were taught to think about who we are, whose we are, and why we are. It's like we're the train, and then their narratives and programs are the tracks that we're just barreling through life, living according to, without taking the time to realize, am I even on the right path? And are these tracks actually going to be the very ones that get me to my desired destination? And so there's a multifaceted approach here when we think about what is the truth that we're abiding by and living our life according to. Do I even know what destination I want to go to, much less so how to get there? And a lot of times what we need to do is actually examine the truth that is guiding us. And I'm saying truth like lowercase truth, not like moral superordinate principles, but just what is the narrative that is guiding me in how I wake up? Am I giving myself time in the morning to invest in me, in my soul, in my spirit? Am I actually waking up and in a place where I can engage with my children with love? Or am I so rushed and so stressed out, kind of first thing in the morning? And how do I ensure that the way that I engage with my kids, with my partner, with my business, with my employees, with my coworkers, how do I make sure that the way that I show up is one that I'm proud of, that I can look back on the life that I've lived in the future one day and say, yeah, I really actually am proud of how I lived my life. Y'all, we need to start thinking in terms of legacy, because every moment I was on a podcast yesterday, and every moment of every day it's like adding the little chips or pieces to the puzzle that will be our life and legacy at the end of it. Every moment is important because it is that extra piece to the puzzle that makes up our legacy. And obviously it's not about a chase to perfection. It's a chase to and a pursuit of living with intention and living with the hope. Hope is the confident expectation of good. And so living with hope completely changes the way I'm actually going to respond to grief. There's going to be a lot of stimulus in our lives. Like grief is a response in so many ways to something devastating, but it's grief with hope, because I have the hope that something good will come at the end of this, whether it's redemption of the problem itself or redemption on the other side of this life. There is a grief and a hope. But that hope comes in, and again, it's kind of like the second track to the railway that we're riding on. Grief might be one track and hope is the other in this particular instance. Whereas in another regard, if we're presented with a conflict at work, well, then maybe we actually are going to engage with, okay, this is who I want to be in this context. I want to be someone that speaks the truth, that lives according to a set of principles that I have defined, and that guides me in how I interact with this problem. So much, and again, I talked about this on the podcast yesterday, so much of how we engage with others, with the world, has to do with how we view ourselves. And the narratives that were spoken about us and to us as children really have a lot to do with the way that we view ourselves. And so in order for us to know what those narratives are, it requires kind of three steps, I guess you could say. Number one is just in the moment when we start feeling upset or aggravated, anxious, to just slow down. That's number one, just slow down. The second we start feeling ourselves getting a little bit anxious or a little bit off-centered or off course even, slow down. Number two is leaning into that, whatever emotion is coming up. And then the third is asking why. Why is that there? Because in asking why, we usually actually can get to the bottom of, oh my gosh, that happened when I was 8 years old. I was told, you're never going to be good at anything. You're never going to amount to much. And that narrative has stuck with me all the way through the way that I show up at work. I have a subconscious belief that I will never amount to much. And so why try? Because here's the thing, that narrative from the past shows up today and has a if this, then that. So if I'm not worth much, then I'm not really going to try. And then that impacts the way that we show up towards projects, towards even parenting, towards the way that we show up in relationship. Well, if I'm not going to amount to much, then why bother? If this, then that. And so if this is true, that narrative, that belief is true, then what is the natural, logical outcome that you experienced as a child? This is why it is so important that we ask the questions that, why do I believe this? Why am I feeling this way? Y'all, this comes from the substitutions that we make in exchange for the ultimate capital T truth. And this is ultimately going back to today's lesson. What are the substitutes in terms of our belief system that we have in place of the truth of what God says about us? If God says we're worthy, yet we were told you're never going to amount to much, who am I going to believe? And what do my actions reveal about my belief system? So you can kind of go about it in two different ways. One, you can actually sit and do that work of pausing, leaning in, and asking why of our emotions and what's coming up for us. Or we can also analyze and kind of do an action audit. What do the actions of my life say about my own belief systems, about me, the world, God? What does it say about who I am? What does it say about whose I am in terms of identity and God's involvement? And then also my why I am. Because we take action according to our beliefs. The quote by Viktor Frankl, which I just love, says, between stimulus and response is choice. We have a choice in every regard for every stimulus. There is no time we are ever a victim as it pertains to our response. We always get to choose that. But every choice is rooted in a belief system. So going back to today's lesson, today I will accept God's peace and joy in glad exchange for all the substitutes that I have made for happiness and peace. And then the next, let my own feeble voice be still, and let me hear the mighty voice for truth itself assure me that I am God's perfect son. Let me be still and listen to the truth. So y'all, this time on the morning show is really our moment, our pause to listen to what is more true than the old historic narratives of the past. What is more true than even what externally people might say or think or do? What is more true than that? We talk about identity as kind of being two parts. The first part is this universal identity that every single person has, which is the fact that we're loved, we belong, we're chosen by God. We have God in us, should we so choose to live accordingly. The fact that we are worthy, we belong, we are precious and honored no matter what. That's an identity that all of us share. And then kind of identity B is ultimately what makes us so different from each other. That's the unique talents and gifts and the things that make us so unique from each other. And here's the thing, that when we're only aware of identity B, we can actually live really isolated and never feel like we belong. A friend of mine, just really struggles with this feeling of belonging. And you'd be surprised to hear that because he's incredibly successful as an entrepreneur. Yet at his core, he's never felt like he belongs. And yet, when you incorporate identity A, where we all actually are very much so of the same family, we are worthy, we belong, we are who God says that we are, that flips everything on its head, because now no matter what, we will always find belonging and meaning in everything because of who God says that we are. That is the ultimate capital T truth. And so both aspects of this is what makes me different, this is what makes me separate in so many ways, yet this is also who I am and what makes me belong fundamentally at my core. Man, there's so much peace that comes with that knowledge, with that knowing. Y'all, this is the meaning of knowing, is to know the truth about who you are, whose you are, and why you are. And then on the other side of that knowing changes us at a molecular core level to then influence all of our actions. That knowing, actually, if we really, really believe it, I think of that word lambano, in terms of the Greek meaning for the word receive. The word receive in Greek, lambano, is effectively akin to a soldier receiving an order. So they receive an order, but they then go take action accordingly. They didn't really receive it. They didn't really lambano if they don't go and do according to what the order was. That's what it means to receive. It's like it impacts you so much, it changes your output. That receiving is so significant of an input, it cannot help but infiltrate into the other areas and corners of your life. And so same thing goes with knowing. It is such an intentional and meaningful impact of this knowledge of hope, of joy, of your identity, that it cannot help but flow outward through the outputs of your life. That is the power of knowing, is that it changes us at a core molecular level so that we can have grief and hope simultaneously. Knowing in so many ways, we talked about this last night on the show, the power of and, that conjunction. It allows for two seemingly opposing aspects of life to coexist, like grief and hope. Like the light that is so potent in your gift, perhaps, yet that light also casts a shadow. So we need to make sure that both come into ownership by us, so that our greatest strengths, like for example, if we have such an ability to love and serve people, but then we also don't want to become codependent, right? So that can be the shadow. Codependency can be the shadow of real love. And then the other aspect is take care of yourself and really love who you are, and see how God made you so unique, and don't become a narcissist. That's the and. And so knowing kind of allows for that and. It's kind of the balance. That perhaps is even the scale, that these two seemingly conflicting truths can hang in the balance of knowing. Because when that knowledge permeates our hearts, man, it changes us at that core level, that then we can't help but go and interact with people from this really strong, robust place, where now we're giving from a place of overflow. I just love this example Lisa Nicholson gave at an event Amazon was hosting, and my team and I were supporting with our partner. And Lisa Nicholson's standing on stage, and she's got a glass of water in her hand, or she's got a glass in her hand with a basin below, and she's got a pitcher. And so she pours the water into the glass half full, and she holds up the glass and she says, y'all, so many of you will give from a glass half full. And then she pours and pours, and then she's got a glass full, and she says, others of you will give from a full cup. And then she pours and pours and pours, and the water pours into the basin below. And then she holds up the cup filled with water over the basin that has water below. And she says, y'all, this cup, this full cup, is for you. The basin, the overflow, is for everybody else. And y'all, that moment had a profound impact on my life, because I had always been living in the complete reversal of that. I had been giving from a half-filled cup, and I had always been living from a fundamental posture of depletion at all times. It was a place of never enough. I was never enough, and therefore I never had enough to give. Because when we switch our fundamental view of ourselves, it impacts the way that we love and give to others. If you change your narrative about you, you're going to be a better father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, parent. You're going to be a better, I'm thinking even like, it's such a silly example, going to PTA meetings. The way that you give and serve at your kid's school, the way you give and serve in the office, it is no longer about you, because you are so confident of you and who you are. Now you're not looking for everyone externally to make your meaning for you. You're good. And y'all, that is such a meaningful place to be coming from, when we know who we are and we don't need anybody else to validate it. And it's not, so we've actually been having some conflict in the YouTube chat over the last couple of days. So I'm going to be handling that. And when we know who we are, I've noticed, how are people engaging? And the people who do not really engage in conflict with the chat are confident in who they are. They don't need somebody to come in and reaffirm it or strengthen it. They know who they are. And so they can have somebody be kind of bullying them, and they're like, oh, it's fine. Now, granted, I don't think it's fine, so I'm going to be taking some action. And at the same time, what a beautiful example of knowing who you are, whose you are, and why you are. The external world loosens its hold over us. It loosens its ability to impact the way that we, again, choose to respond. Between stimulus and response is choice. If my worth and my value and my meaning is predicated on the external, well, then they have so much power over my choice to then respond. Rather than my choice is rooted in an internal belief in who I am, whose I am, and why I am. And then that's the driver for my choice of how I respond. And here's the thing. It's not just who we are, why we are, and whose we are, but that why and everything here in this moment of those three, who, whose, and why, it's also where am I going? Because that is going to inform the choice I make in terms of the response as it pertains to the direction of my life. Every single response gets us a little bit closer or farther away from where we're going. And so, yes, we need to know the who, whose, and why, but also where. Where are we going? And then that informs the very action we take, not just the ability to not listen to people, but also the clear direction of I'm actually going to remove myself from this situation. I was talking with my therapist 2 weeks ago. My darling and I both were. And we were talking about a really tough relationship that we're both involved in with someone else. And he was encouraging us about gray stoning, which is effectively not giving somebody who has maybe more dramatic or even potentially narcissistic tendencies, just like not giving them much emotional energy. Yesterday we were talking, I loved this conversation last night about effectively considering how we have a bank, not just financially, but we have a bank of energy. Every morning you start the day with 100%, and over the course of the day, you're expending your energy and effectively making deposits into people, into experiences, into business, into relationships. You're making investments into each one of these places, withdrawing from your energy and then depositing it and investing into these other categories. So when it comes to someone that has continuously proven to be dramatic, not really speak the truth, therefore not really be trustworthy, don't give them much energy. You could still be in their presence, but you're not actually emotionally invested. Again, because with the energy bank, you can invest in emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and physical intelligences, and each one of those have, many layers beneath that. And so I can invest in terms of even just physically being present with that person, but I'm not emotionally invested because I know that yield, that return on that emotional investment is not healthy and not wise, and it's not safe. So this comes to this question of my therapist said, well, why do you even want to be in that relationship? Because my value system includes this aspect of, the direction of where I'm going. Because if I was only focusing on just who I am, whose I am, and why I am, I might actually withdraw from that relationship. But when I now put on the lens of 25, 40, 50 years down the road, I actually anticipate being in a relationship with that person. So it's not just the immediate direction of, I'm just going to stop this relationship because it's hard. I actually have the value of family. I have the value of loyalty. I have a value not just beyond truth of, okay, this person actually is really challenging to be around. There's the subsequent value of, this is hard, and I'm in it for the long haul because I know the direction of where I'm going, and where I'm going is going to be intimate with family. So therefore, what are the boundaries that allow for that intimacy to coexist and us to operate in relationship together for hopefully a really long time? Y'all, I'm going to jump here in the chat, 3795. Good morning. I'm glad you're here. You're good, girl. Good morning. Mystic, hello. Good to see y'all. Lost in the Sound, hello. Luckwinder, hello. Some Dead Hero, good morning. NYK, Brian, good to see y'all. Wisco, Sender V, I'm glad to see you. I'm glad you're here. Rams Tech Copier, good morning. Paul, good morning. Scott, Stephen, good morning. Ronnie, good morning. Wisco, thank you. I appreciate your note. Baba, good morning. Daniel, Iblin, good morning. Thanks. Johnny Vega, good morning. Viking Lloyd, I'm so glad you're here. M1KLK, good morning. Handy Andy, good morning. Demo Crack, good morning. M1LK, Sadie Am, good morning. Sadie Am says how to maintain perfect and toxic relationship. You know, it is interesting. I think that if we are to be emotionally engaged in some relationships, they could become toxic. But if we can learn how to engage, because in some ways that's where it is like, do I want to maintain relationship with these people? And if we do, how do we do that with wisdom? And so if we were to be emotionally engaged in relationship with that person, that would be dangerous or unsafe for us. And yet, if I can figure out how to exist sans emotion but still have physical presence there, and man, there's actually a lot of opportunity to really enjoy that person, because you can still experience the moment of joy but not being emotionally invested beyond that, because the emotional investment where it has proved toxic in the past is where it's dangerous. And then there's also the decisions of, okay, well, I'm not going to be that close to you. I'm going to be in physical proximity and show interest in some regard, but I'm not going to be emotionally engaged. And that's really hard. I actually think that we have to judge the level of the relationship. If you're married to this person, I think that's really, really hard to not be emotionally engaged. Yeah, that's a hard one. What's the degree of the relationship that you're trying to maintain as it pertains to the toxicity levels? And can you even exist in that relationship being kind of emotionally withdrawn, but still physically present? And that's something only you can answer. That's something only you can answer. And frankly, I think that's our responsibility as individuals to answer. And then we go from there. So, Yvonne, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. SSG Morgan, good morning. RIP Watts, good morning. Y'all, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and hop off. We're going to have another show. Oh, I'm so excited, actually. We're going to be having, for those of you who are in the trades or interested to learn about the trades, we are going to be going live today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern with a gentleman, Seth. I'm super, super excited about this. And then we'll be going live again later today at 6 p.m. Eastern for the Knowing Show, where we'll just kind of keep doing the work and keep diving in. And I'm excited to have more conversation with y'all. 1:30 p.m. Eastern, much more so focused. My family has a trades business. It was started in 1922 by my great grandfather. So I have a podcast around trades, and I've been hooking it up to the Knowing Show so that we can go live in both places. So 1:30 p.m. Eastern for those of you interested in marketing, sales, all that good stuff. And then we'll be going live again at 6 p.m. Eastern to continue our conversation around the cultivation of the individual. So Vizzy's here. Good morning. I'm glad to see you. Good. Come back. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. I will see you soon.